Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today, we are going to continue our study of the book of Joshua, the Sefer Yehoshua. We are going to study Perek Vav, the 6th chapter. We ended the last podcast with the first verse of this chapter 6 because in the way the parshiot, the Jewish sections are divided, the first verse of chapter 6 is really the last verse of the previous chapter 5. I do want to read it today again because it will lead us into the story of Jericho. It is both the end of before and the beginning of what we're about to read. So let me read this verse, and then I will go on a slight tangent for a few moments, which will help us really understand this chapter in context. Jericho sogeres umisugeres. The city of Jericho was closed up and closed up, like doubly closed up tight, mipnei b'nei Yisrael, from before the people of Israel. Ein yotzei ve'ein ba. No one was leaving the city, and no one was coming into the city. Now, obviously they were afraid of impending attack, but there was no communication. Now, what this is referring us back to is the book that preceded the book of Joshua was the book of Deuteronomy, the 5th of the 5 books of Moses. In the book of Devarim, in Deuteronomy, instructions were given as to what should be done when one approaches a city to battle. Now remember, this is going to be the first of a series of many battles of the conquering of the land of Israel. So it makes sense for us to go back and read God's instructions to the people when they were back on the other side of the Jordan, before Moses died, when God told them, what are you going to do when you start approaching a city in order to attack it? And this is how it began in Deuteronomy. Ki tikrav, this is Deuteronomy 20, Devarim chapter 20, verse 10. Ki tikrav el ir, when you get close to a city, lihilachem aleha, to wage war against it, vikarasa eleha l'shalom. The first thing to do is you call out to that city in peace. You offer peace terms. V'haya im shalom ta'ancha, and it will be that if they answer you in peace, upatcha lach, and they open up to you, v'haya kol ha'amanim sabayu l'chalamas v'avaducha, then all of the people that live within that city will then be pay tax to you, and they will be underneath your governance. In other words, you will be the rulers of the area, and they will be under you. They will be subjects of your kingdom or your government. This verse here that we just read in Joshua is saying Jericho sogeres umisugeres, was closed up, doubly closed up. That is the opposite of ufatcha lach, and they will open to you. So one would infer from here, and Nachmanides and Maimonides and many of the other medieval scholars, notably Rashi, did not understand this chapter in Deuteronomy this way, but Nachmanides and Maimonides did, that when you approached a city, even a city in Canaan, what the next step is, the first step is to offer peace terms. But over here, Jericho was sogeres umisugeres. They closed up. There was nobody talking. And as we continue, I'm going to read back in Deuteronomy, V'im lo tashlim, if they do not make peace with you, v'yastam chal milchama, and they decide that their response is going to be to wage war against you, then b'tzarta Allah, then you lay siege to the city, which we're about to read about in Jericho. And what will God do? Unisana Adonai Elohecha biyadecha, God will put that city in your hand, v'yikisa kol et kol zuchura lefichorev, and you kill all of its males, meaning all of those of fighting age, up to the sword, and so on. Rashi understands this parsha differently that I just read in Deuteronomy, because the parsha then continues, and it says, Rak hanoshim vihataf v'habehema. Well, actually, I'm going to get to this issue later because we're going to refer back in future podcasts to this chapter in Deuteronomy because it's very relevant to how to understand all of the wars of Joshua, and that is the issue of were the Canaanites offered peace? Now, according to the Ramban, that's Nachmanides, and the Rambam, which is Maimonides, they understood Deuteronomy the way I just read it, which is that those verses are referring to every time the people attacked a city in Canaan, they offered peace first. Now, remember, I just read, if they do not wage peace, if they do not agree to peaceful terms, then you lay siege, and God will place them in your hand. So now let's go back to chapter 6 here in Joshua. Vayomer Adonai Yoshua. So God said to Yoshua, we just read, remember, that Jericho was sogeres umesugeres. So God said, Re'eh, you shall see, nosati v'yodcha, I have put them in your hand. A direct reference to what God had said in Devarim, that if they choose to close up and not talk to you, I will place them in your hand. Et Jericho, the city of Jericho, Viet Malka, and the king, Giborei Achayel, all of the powerful men of the army. I'm going to put them under you. You will defeat them in battle. V'sabosem esair, and you will encircle the city, meaning you will go around the city, kol anshe al-milchama, all of the men of war. Hakefet oir pam echas, you will go walk around the entire city one time. Kota seshes yomim, do that for 6 days in a row. V'shiva kohanim yisu, and 7 priests will carry shiva shofros, 7 horns, hayovlim lifnei Aaron, which will blow in front of the ark. Uvayom hashvi, on the 7th day, tasobu atu sheva pamim, and then you go around 7 times. V'hakohanim yitku bashofaros, while the priests are blowing the horns. V'hayabim shoch bekeren hayovel, and when the final long sound of the horn it will be blown, kishamachem, when you hear that's kol hashofar, the final long blast of the horn, then yariu cholam through a gedola, then the entire nation, all the people will scream out a shriek and a scream, and at that moment the city wall will fall, the alu ha'am ish negdo, and the nation will each person who is standing opposite a breach in the wall will run into that breach in the wall. It's unclear if this means the entire wall fell or just areas of the wall fell, opposite which the people can then run through and attack the interior of the city. So those were God's instructions. Now, we see lots of 7s here, the 7 horns, the 7 priests, the 7 times around, 7 days in a row. It's very clearly a reference to the purpose, a lesson that God is trying to teach the people in their first battle. This is going to be the first in a series of many battles. It's the only one where we read about this very elaborate ceremony that took place in the beginning. What does 7 represent? 7, we find throughout the Torah, is a very common number. The most famously, of course, is the 7 days of the week leading to the 7th day, which is Shabbat, which is the Sabbath. The idea of Shabbat is, and this I'm not saying any mystical mysteries here, this is clearly the obvious idea of Shabbat, which is spoken about in the Torah many times. We work for ourselves for 6 days, and on the 7th day is for God. The same thing is we rest and we build our relationship with God. In other words, by having the 7-day cycle, we demonstrate that our purpose of our life is to do and keep and live the way that God wants us to live. The other famous cycle is the 7-year sabbatical cycle, where we work the fields for 6 years, and in the 7th year, the fruit of our fields goes to charity, and we spend our time, instead of working, again, with God. The 7 days of the holidays punctuate the year, the 7 days of Passover, the 7 days of Sukkot. These are ideas, are holidays which we spend with God. These are the regalim, the time when we left our homes and went to the temple in order to celebrate with God. So the idea here of 7 is to demonstrate you're about to attack a city. You're about to begin a conquest. This is a military conquest. The highest risk here is that the people will think that this is just a war of conquest, a war to win captives, to win wealth, to win land. But the point here is God is trying to tell the people that that's not the way it is. This is a place where this is a time for you to recognize and remember that the purpose of this conquest is if we go back to Deuteronomy, numerous times over and over again, God told the people, I am not sending you to conquer the land because you're great, strong, powerful, and mighty warriors, or because you deserve this, and because you're great, wonderful people. And no, I'm doing this because I have a message. There's a message of ethical monotheism, which is the message that I am the creator of the world. I am the only creator of the world. And I, God, want something from you. I want you to live a moral, good, just life. I want you to live a life of justice and righteousness. This is what I want. The people of Canaan, the 7 nations, epitomize, and this again is repeated in Deuteronomy many times. Remember, Joshua is the sequel to Deuteronomy. Is repeated over and over again that their pagan practices, their beliefs in many gods, leads to a belief that is based on the belief that the gods are mercurial, the gods have needs and desires, and we need to fill those needs and desires, which leads to sacrificing to those gods, and it leads to the ultimate evil, as mentioned in Deuteronomy, of child sacrifice to those gods. The very things that God stands the most against, these are the abominations that the people were coming here against. This dramatic ceremony, which we're reading about now in this chapter, is to remind the Jews that the conquering of Jericho, the purpose of this is not because you're mighty and strong and great, that you should be proud of yourself and get all this bounty and booty and everything and land, etc. The purpose of this is because in this land you are going to build a society that is based on this idea, which is new to the world, this idea that there is one God who wants us to live a moral life. Vayikra Yoshua ben Nun al HaKohanim, at verse 6, so Joshua, the son of Nun, called out to the priests, Vayomer aleim, and he said to them, Su'u et aron habris, I want you to carry the Ark of the Covenant. V'shiva Kohanim yisu shiva shofars yovelim, and there should be 7 priests carrying 7 horns that are blowing lifnei Aron Adonai, before the Ark of God. Vayomer el ha'am, and then he said to the nation, Ivru v'sobu es ha'ir, I want you to go forward and march around the city, v'hechalutz ya'avor lifnei Aron Adonai, and the vanguard, the lead shock troops, they standing and in front of the covenant, of the Ark of the Covenant. This is very unusual that the people are walking before the Ark. This is part of the process that we mentioned in previous chapters, the process of God receding into the background, because he wants the people to learn that while, of course, I, as God, am present and always here, but you're not going to see me anymore like it used to be it's not me. I act through you. I want the people to move forward. It's the miraculous aspects are slowly receding into the background, while the action of the people, the action of human beings, is what's moving into the foreground. Vayikem Mar Yoshua al-Am, and it was when Joshua said to the nation, V'shiva HaKohanim, and to the 7 priests, no Sim Shiva Shofros, who were carrying the 7 horns, Ayovlim Lifnei Adonai, that were blowing in front of the ark. Avru v'taku b'shofros, they went forward and they blew the horns. V'aron bris Adonai, and the Ark of the Covenant of God, Holech Acharem, was going after them, emphasizing this idea that the people are first, the Ark is next. V'hachalutz holech lifnei HaKohanim, and the vanguard was walking in front of the priests, Tokei HaShofros, who were blowing the horns, V'hama'asef, and the rear guard, Holech Acharei Aaron, they went behind the ark, Haloch v'tekoa b'shofros, also blowing the horns. V'yata'am tzivu Yoshua leimar, and the nation, Joshua commanded them as follows: Lo toriu v'lo tashmiu et kolchem. If you're not blowing the horns, don't scream and yell and shout. It's not your voice. The voice of the shofar represents the sound of God. Remember, the shofars that we blow on Rosh Hashanah is a message from God to remind us to awaken our hearts. The message of the shofar that was blown on the Mount Sinai was the sign of God talking to the people. That's when the shofar is blowing. I only want God's sound, so to speak, not your sound. V'lo yetzei mipichem davar, says Joshua. I don't want a single word coming out of your mouth. Ad yom omri alechem, until I tell you now it's time for you to go. Hariu v'ariosim. Then, when I say it's time to scream, that's when you will scream. I want the people of Jericho also to see this message that we are here. It is God speaking. It is God making the noise, not us human beings. Vayasev Aron Adonai Yisrael. And the ark of God went around the city. Hakef Pamechas went around once. And then they came back to the camp and they slept. Then, verse 12, Joshua gets up in the morning, and the priests again carried the ark of God. And the 7 priests carrying the 7 horns before the ark. They were going and blowing. Again, the vanguard, the front troops were going in front of them. And the rear guard, they were going behind, the same way as yesterday. Was going and blowing. And they went around the city just like this, the same on the second day. Then they went back to their camp. This is what they did for 6 days. And it was on the 7th day. And they got awakened. They woke up early in the morning at the break of dawn. And they went around the city in the same way, but this time Sheva Pa'amim. They went 7 times around. Because only on this day, Sheva Pa'amim, they went around the city 7 times. And it was at the 7th time going around. The priests blew the horns. And Joshua said to the nation, Hariu, scream out loud. Now it's time for us to take over. Until now, we were listening to the sounds that represented the godliness. Now, human beings take action. Because God has already, it's as if He has already given you the city. And I am telling you now that this city, and this is representative, we are not attacking because we want to get all the wealth. There will be time and place for that. But at this point, I want to demonstrate this very, very important notion, Joshua says, that these wars are different than other wars, than other people that attack and because they're greedy, because they want to take things away from others. This we are doing because, as we read repeatedly in Deuteronomy, because of the abominable ways of the Canaanites and the honorable ways that represented by the monotheism that we represent. Joshua is saying, therefore, everything that's in this city, Cherem, is completely off limits. It's Cherem, meaning you're not allowed to touch it, you're not allowed to use it, you're not allowed to take the things. Everything in the city is set aside for God. Rak Rachav Hazona, only one person, Rahab, Rachav, the harlot, the one who we made a promise to because she helped the spies, or a few chapters ago, Tichya, she should be allowed to live. He v'chol asher ita b'bayis, and everything that is in the house with her, whoever is there with her family, they should be spared. Ki hechbata et hamalachim asher shalachnu, because she hid the spies that we had sent out earlier. V'rakatem shimru min hacherem, but you have to be very careful from all of these items that are all of the riches and wealth in the city that are now cherem, are now prohibited to touch. Pentachrimu, lest you think that you can take them, v'lakachtem min hacherem, and you take from the prohibited items, samtem et machane Yisrael hacherem. If you do that, then you will bring destruction upon the camp of Israel, v'achartem oso, and you will bring disasters to the people. V'achartem also could mean, and you will embarrass the people, because people will think we're just like everyone else, and this is just a war of conquest like any other. V'chol klei kesef v'zav, and any silver or gold, uklei nechoshes, uvarzel, or copper or iron, kodesh ul Adonai, is holy unto God. Otsar Adonai yavo, and they should go into the treasury of God's treasury, meaning for the temple. Vayora ha'am, and Joshua gave them these instructions. So the people screamed out, Vayisku b'shofaros, and they blew the horns. Vayich shmo ha'am eskol ha'shofar, and when they heard the horn, Vayariu ha'am tru ha'gedol, the people let out this massive scream and shout. Vatipol ha'choma, and immediately the wall fell tachtea, from beneath it. Vayal ha'am la'ira, and the nation went immediately into the city, each negdo, each person opposite the breach in the wall that was in front of him, vayalkedu asir, and they captured the city. Vayacharim v'eskol asher boyer, and they destroyed everyone in the city, meish v'adisha, men and women, vinar v'azokin, elderly and children, v'ad shor v'aseh, v'chamor l'ficharav, even the animals were destroyed. V'lishnaim ha'anoshim ha'meraglim es ha'aretz, and to the two men that had been sent earlier as spies, the two that were hidden by Rachav, Amar Yoshua, Joshua told them, Bo beis ha'isha, I want you to go to the house of the woman Hazona, the harlot, v'yotziu misham, and take out from that house et ha'isha v'et kol asher la, this woman and everything that she owns, kasher nishbatim la, just like you swore. Because you guys know where she is, and you know her home, I want you to get it. Remember, her home was in the wall. And this seems to mean that the wall fell in breaches, not the entire wall. There was areas of the wall that collapsed, so that ish negdo, the people that were opposite those breaches, had a way to run into the wall, into the city. But parts of the wall, clearly at that part of the wall where her home was, obviously remained intact. Vayavo hana'arim ha'meraglim, and the young men who had been the spies went, vayotziu, and they took out Rachav, Vesavia, and her father, Vesima, and her mother, Vesachah, and her brother, and her brothers, Veskol asher la, and all of her belongings, Veskol mishpachoseha, Otziu, and everyone attached to that family they took out, Vayanichu michutz l'machne Yisrael, and they gave them a place, a safe haven, outside the encampment where the encampment of Israel was. The city was burnt in flames, V'chol asher ba, and everything in it. However, Rakakesef v'hazav, the silver and the gold, uchlean achoshes v'abarzel, and the other metals, the iron, the copper, nosnu otzar beis Adonai, were placed in the treasury of the tabernacle, not the temple yet. V'yas Rachav Azona, and Rachav the harlot, v'yas Beisavia, and her father's house, v'yas Kol Asher, in other words, her family's house, v'yas Kol Asher la, and everything that she owned, Hechaya Yoshua, Joshua, allowed to live. So all of her family, extended family as well, Vateshev B'Kerev Yisrael, and they lived among the Jewish people Adayom Hazeh, until this day. In other words, they converted into Judaism, they joined the Jewish people, and their descendants are among the Jewish people until today. Ki hechbi'a et malachim, because she hid the messengers, the spies, Asher Shalach Yoshua l'Ragel et Jericho, that Joshua had sent to search out Jericho. Vayishba Yoshua Beisehi Leimar. Vayashba, and Joshua swore, in other words, he made an oath at this time as follows: Arur ha'ish, cursed be the man lifnei Adonai, before God, Asher yakum uvano asir azos es Jericho, that ever gets up and rebuilds the city of Jericho. Bivchoro yasdena uvitziro yatziv l'aseh. He will have built it at the price of losing his firstborn, and his youngest child will be the price of his setting up doors. Vayhi Adonai Yoshua, and God was with Joshua. Vayhi Sham'o b'chol haaretz, and his reputation went before him throughout the entire land. So this is the account of the conquest of Jericho, of Jericho. Thank you so much for studying chapter 6 together. Looking forward to studying chapter 7, and certainly the rest of this book of Joshua together.